Wilhelm wanted to be seen as a strong military leader because the army had always been very important in Germany. He also wanted Germany to be respected as a world power. He was an unstable man and very unpredictable. And he constantly needed to prove himself. Many people put this down to an accident at birth and his upbringing as a small child. The accident had left him with a withered left arm, caused him to be partly deaf, and affected his balance. No kind of weakness could be tolerated in a future Kaiser. So Wilhelm's parents tried many treatments, from electric shock to a special brace. These had no effect on his body, but affected his personality. In spite of his physical problems, his parents were very strict with him. Wilhelm's tutor, Dr. Jörg Hinspeter, was ordered to make no allowances as he taught him to ride.
When the prince was 8 years old, a lackey still had to lead his pony by the rein, because his balance was so bad that his unsteadiness caused intolerable anxiety to himself and others. It had to be overcome, no matter what the cost. Therefore, I set the weeping prince on his horse, without stirrups, and compelled him to go through the various paces. He fell off continually. Every time, despite his prayers and tears, I lifted him up and set him upon its back again. After weeks of torture, the difficult task was accomplished. He got his balance.
Wilhelm was a grandson of Queen Victoria, and during his holidays he was sent to visit her in England. There, with his British cousins, he would act out old battles in a specially built playground with trenches and a miniature fort. He grew to know Britain well and was jealous of its empire, and above all, its navy. He wanted his own empire and navy to rival Britain's.
When as a little boy I was allowed to visit Portsmouth and Plymouth, I admired the proud English ships. There awoke in me the wish to build ships of my own like these someday, and when I was grown up to possess as fine a navy as the English.
At 18, in spite of his arm, Wilhelm joined the army. There he said he found his true home and family.
Before I entered the regiment, I had lived through such fearful years of unappreciation of my nature. The officer corps provided me with joy and happiness, and contentment on earth.
In 1888, at the age of 29, Wilhelm became Emperor of Germany. He had always been told what to do. Now, he would take his own decisions.
I alone know something. I alone decide.
In the 19th century, an industrial revolution had begun in Britain. By the beginning of the 20th century, Germany and the USA had taken the lead in the development of new technology. All across Europe, electricity had turned night into day. Motor vehicles had changed the speed of travel. And aircraft had defied gravity. In Germany, much of this new technology was used to help the armed forces. New guns were made for the army, and by 1905 a huge fleet of warships was being built. But in 1906, Britain launched a new kind of fast and heavily armed battleship, the Dreadnought. Wilhelm didn't want to be left out. He was going to have as great a navy as Britain's. So Germany announced that they would build 4 dreadnoughts. Britain wasn't going to be outdone, and soon the two countries were involved in a naval arms race. The great German landowning families supported the build-up of the armed forces. Like the Kaiser and his generals, they believed in German supremacy and wanted a German empire to rival the empires of Britain and France. But not everyone in Germany agreed with them. In just 30 years, Berlin had changed from a town of 700,000 people to a thriving city of over 2 million. The factories had attracted thousands of workers. But they weren't interested in empires. They wanted a share of Germany's wealth and a better standard of living. This didn't matter to Wilhelm. He rejected the workers and their calls for reform. He and some of his generals began to talk of war as a way of pulling Germany together. Britain and other European countries were very worried by these tensions in Germany and by the Kaiser's erratic behavior. In the years before 1914, everyone was talking about war.
Why were the German people so unwilling to give the Weimar Republic their support? The story of the Republic began in 1918, at the end of the First World War. It had a short, troubled history, and it ended in 1933, when Hitler came to power. Before the First World War, power in Germany had been concentrated in the hands of the Kaiser, or Emperor. But late in 1918, the war was going badly for Germany. There was a danger it would be invaded. Then President Wilson published his 14 points. Germany's military leaders saw the chance to negotiate better peace terms on the basis of these proposals before the war reached German territory. When they asked the Allies for a ceasefire, Wilson insisted that the Kaiser abdicate and Germany become a democracy. The generals refused and ordered the armed forces to go back to war. But the men in the army and navy knew the war was as good as lost. They'd had enough. Some mutinied. The generals then had to tell the Kaiser he no longer controlled his armed forces.
The army will march home in peace and order under its leaders and commanding generals, but not under the command of your majesty, for it no longer stands behind your majesty. Today, oaths of loyalty have no substance.
The Kaiser was stunned.
Betrayal. Utter betrayal,
he said. He abdicated and fled to the Netherlands, leaving a power vacuum that had to be filled. An elected parliament was set up called the Reichstag. The Socialist Party was the largest. Their leader was Friedrich Ebert, who had campaigned against the Kaiser for democracy for years. He became the new leader of a democratic Germany as the Weimar Republic came into being. Ebert swore,
"To witness the new principle of the German people, for freedom, justice and social welfare."
Ebert's vision was that the Republic would exist for the benefit of its people, but he never managed to make it popular with them. The first thing that made it unpopular was its association with the Versailles Treaty.
The Allied leaders were arguing their way over the whole future of the German people. Under their hands, the map of Europe was drawn and redrawn again. At last, after more than 3 months of discussion, they presented the terms of their treaty to the Germans. Germany lost land in the east, the west and the north. In the east, the most important of those losses was the wide strip of territory given to the newly independent Poland, separating East Prussia from the rest of Germany. While on the west, France took back the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, and was also given the right to mine coal in the Saar, an area placed under League of Nations control for 15 years. To protect France, Germany was forbidden to station soldiers in the Rhineland, an area which was to be occupied by Allied troops until 1935. It was not only the loss of territory which Germany resented, but also the fact that Czechoslovakia and Poland now contained large numbers of Germans. And as if to add insult to injury, the treaty forbade German-speaking Austria to unite with Germany. Her fortifications were to be destroyed. Her army was to be reduced to 100,000 men. No air force, no submarines, and to accept blame for starting the war and pay reparations. In protest at Scapa Flow, the British naval base, the Germans scuttled their fleet rather than hand it over to the Allies. It was a last defiant gesture. Germany would have to agree to the terms. She was in no position to restart the war. So, in the high summer of 1919, the German delegates were brought to the Great Hall of Mirrors at Versailles to sign the peace treaty. It was a compromise peace that satisfied not even one single Allied leader, and predictably the Germans loathed it.
Germans hated the Treaty of Versailles. It forced Germany to disarm and took away territory, colonies and people. It treated Germany like a vanquished enemy, even though in 1918 the generals had sued for a negotiated peace. As one returning soldier remembered it,
believing in the 14 points of President Wilson, we frontline soldiers then allowed the most terrible treason of world history to take place. The Red traitor Ebert sold out our people and signed the Treaty of Versailles.
Ebert had had nothing to do with drafting the treaty, but the Allies threatened to go back to war and he was forced to sign it or face Germany being invaded. Ebert, and by association the Weimar Republic, were blamed for the treaty. People on the right said that Germany had been stabbed in the back by Ebert and the socialists. In 1924, Adolf Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf,
"So it had all been in vain all the sacrifices, in vain the death of 2 millions. Had they died for this, so a gang of wretched criminals could lay their hands on the fatherland?"